Okay, we are back and we are still the Senate Committee on Institutions. It is 3:04 and we're going to now be talking about corrections and finding out what is happening with the corrections workforce. We understand that is a continuing and serious problem. And you know us all,
Yeah.
so we won't
Yeah.
introduce ourselves, but if you could please introduce yourself and
Sure.
let us know what you think we need to know.
Sure. So thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, I'm Steve Howard. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont State Employees Association. And in that capacity, the VSEA is the union that represents the frontline workers in the Department of Corrections, particularly our security staff and all of the folks in the field, and the administrative staff, the educators who work in the Department of Corrections. The way I'll start this is really just to outline how the VSEA views its role in this process in the State House. I mean, our view is that the governor is elected by the people of Vermont to run the Department of Corrections and all of state government. And the legislature's job is to make sure he's running it well. And it is our obligation to give voice to our members who can't be here because they're working in the system when we think it's not being run well, or when we think there are at least problem areas that need to be addressed. I have a couple of things. I think this has been emailed to your committee, so you should have it electronically, but I brought a paper copy just in case you need it. Some people prefer paper. What I am handing out is a packet that we gave to the Joint Justice Oversight Committee this fall. I think the last meeting, it was in November or December. I think it was in December. And basically this packet includes some statistical information about the vacancy rates and the growth of vacancy rates in corrections. It includes some feedback or testimony directly from our members about what's going on from their perspective. And then it includes some recommendations for the legislature in terms of data that you should seek, questions you should ask, that will give you a fuller picture of what's happening in the Department of Corrections. We describe the current staffing situation from our perspective. It's devolved into what we call a humanitarian crisis. I don't mean to exaggerate. This has been going on for 5 years, and we've had some ups and we've had some downs. But we're now in a position where we're getting calls from our members who say they aren't getting bathroom breaks. They're having to change their uniforms because nobody's coming to give them a chance to use the restroom. More frightening than that is the calls that we receive from our members who have fallen asleep driving home, driven off the road because they're working 16-hour shift after 16-hour shift, day after day after day, with little time off to live their life or even to get adequate amount of sleep and rest, which is not only dangerous for them, but very concerning for folks who are on the road with them. I think their biggest concern is that they're going to hurt somebody, some mother driving their kids to school. They're going to fall asleep and something horrible is going to happen. And you'll see in some of the statistics, we did a little bit of math. The average turnover in the CO1 position, which is the entry level position, is a real thing you have to watch out for with data. Sometimes what happens is numbers are presented to you that count all the staff in a correctional facility. The crisis is really with the security staff, the folks who have direct contact with the offenders. And the average over the past 3 fiscal years, the average turnover in the CO1 position, the past 3 fiscal years, 49% turnover. And I think you heard the commissioner when he testified, they can hire people, they can't keep people. And that is really evident by the number that shows that the positions are rapidly turning over. The number of vacancies from March of 2023 to November of 2023, which is the latest data we have, although we hope to get some updated data soon, The number of vacancies in the CO1 position doubled from 40 vacancies in March to 81 in November. Really a serious increase, and the place where it's most pronounced, and it's really appropriate, is Senator Major is here from Windsor County and close to Windham County, of course, where the chair represents. Southern State Correctional Facility in Springfield, their growth in vacant positions went from 12% to 41%. A really dramatic increase in the number of vacant positions. And just this weekend, in a rare moment, the department had to use what's called the Everbridge system to alert all personnel and corrections that they had a staffing emergency. And they called it a staffing emergency, where they really had they had inadequate staff to safely operate the correctional facility. So fortunately, they did receive some help from people who responded to that, not enough, but at least enough to keep the facility running. This has a profound effect on our members, but also.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, Senator.
No, that's okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you just, you said something as to keep the facility running. What choice do you have? I mean, if
And there's not a lot of options. The facility doesn't close. It's a 24/7, 365 operation. Often they'll close posts, and they'll double, the number of offenders who a correctional officer is responsible for, to try to just make sure somebody is watching. They do get, in this case, they were able to get some additional staff who came in on their day off. People were held over. They weren't allowed to go home at the end of their shift. And they had, so the combination of those two things did make it, I think they also did collapse some posts, manageable in that situation. But they, at some point, were getting close to the edge where they just really didn't have enough people to even do that. So the problem is people are not getting, there's the work-life balance that has been promised to people is not materializing in most of the correctional facilities across the state. And it's particularly impactful to the new people who were promised a work-life balance and what's called the 2-2-3 schedule.
Right. And I remember when that was proposed. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure.
About what it was and then what it is now?
Yeah. So the schedule was supposed to give people 2 on, 2 off, 3 on, so on and so forth. So people would have basically in a 2-week period, they would have a pretty significant break from working in the correctional facility. And that has not materialized because we don't have enough people. The plan itself is not a bad plan. You just can't operate the plan without people. And I think we rushed into the plan. One thing that has happened in some facilities is there were some agreed upon metrics that the union and the department agreed to that would trigger a vote by our members as to whether to go to the 2-2-3 schedule. And what happened was, or what occurred in some facilities across the state of Newport, I think it was one of the places where I know it did occur. The management counted people who were on the schedule, but not available to work. So they're out on workers' comp, they're out on TRD, they're out on military leave. And so those holes still need to be filled, and they're filled with people being held over, coming in on their days off. And that just caused more people to leave. And then the hole gets worse and worse and worse. So 2-2-3 is not a bad idea in and of itself, but you have to start by getting people. You need to have an adequate staff. So I think I'm going to be a little bit off on these numbers, so don't hold me to it. But the minimum number you needed in Northern, for instance, was 79 security staff. And they were at the time, I think, around really 50 something. And they operate that way, consistently. So that's very problematic. I think it's shaken our members' faith in the schedule, in the hope that was they had to the plan.
Yes,
I know that you are having significant marketing dollars going towards recruitment. I know that it is, in electronic media as far as, I've seen your television ads.
They're not mine, they're departments.
Was it department? Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Departments. Uh, Are we going outside of the state? Are we going and from a, pay, perspective, how do we compare to the other states that surround us, the New Yorks, the Massachusetts, the Connecticut's, the Rhode Islands, the New Hampshires?
Yeah, it's hard to compare because the agreements are so different.
Yeah.
I will say that, there were a couple of things that were really important that we lost in, we've had a couple of moments that were really, promising in corrections, where, we had serious staffing crises and the management, BSEA and the administration entered into what's called a side letter of agreement, in which incentives were offered, to either, recruit and retain staff, or to encourage other staff, like field staff, for instance, to give up, or even facility staff, to come into work on their days off, so that the amount of 16-hour shifts could be minimized. And we were hopeful that those would remain in place, because they were showing promise. The administration chose not to restore those. And we went from having some promising numbers in terms of employment back to the crisis where we are today. So what we know works.
Was there a reason?
What's expensive? What's happening is the commissioner was accurate. This is a tough labor market, and we all know that. That's not an excuse to not do anything. But what it is, just basic labor economics, is you have to be competitive in that market.
Yes.
And so we felt like we were reaching a place where we were competitive. And the administration, I think, you have to ask them why they just chose not to restore them, but that was definitely an investment of additional revenue. We have to be careful because the union and the administration can't come to the legislature and ask the legislature to do anything that we didn't get in bargaining.
Sure.
And anything related to wages is of course bargainable.
Of course.
But two things that were not in the contract that we just, the contract are currently under, that were in a side letter that seemed to be having an effect were, with two. One is an incentive called double time. So if you volunteered to come in on your day off, you would be paid double time, twice what your hourly wage was. That was working. Our members tell us over and over again that was working, and that would be a very helpful tool in encouraging people to cover some of the overtime while we try to stabilize ourselves in this crisis. The other thing is the security bonus was really reduced. So you heard the commissioner say that a lot of the side letter agreement was incorporated in the contract, and about half of it was, but two of the major financial components weren't. We're not asking the legislature to do anything about that. What we do hope the legislature can help us do is use your influence and your power to shine a light on this crisis, to encourage the administration to come to the table with us. We are very hopeful. We're expected to meet with the administration on February 13th to discuss the situation, and we're very grateful that they have agreed to our request to meet to discuss the situation. So that is really important. We're hopeful that this committee and your counterparts in both government operations and on the House side will dedicate at least some time on a weekly basis to bring the administration in, bring the union in, bring folks in to talk about this issue. There's probably no issue that affects corrections more than the staffing crisis at the moment. And, you think about criminal justice reform, and those folks are, if you're interested in criminal justice reform. Right now, the folks who are incarcerated are often locked in their cells, the lack of staff. They don't have education because there's no correctional officer to go to the classroom. They're not getting rep time. They're staying inside. That's not great for anybody. And really all of the rehabilitative and socially encouraging aspects of what we're trying to put in place in our correction system are on hold because there's no staff. So we have to solve this problem first. The other things that the legislature could do, pensions. Pensions are not bargainable. They're a statute. They're a feature of the statute. We created a new plan for corrections recently called Group G. The promising part of Group G is that it gives our correctional officers, if they have 20 years of service, the ability to retire at age 55. The average life expectancy of a normal American is 77. We're lucky we lived about 77. The average life expectancy of a correctional officer is 59. This is a very trying position. People have physical demands. They have a lot of trauma rates, PTSD rates higher among correctional officers than veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan. So that 55 gave them at least a break to say, we want to get out. The improvements that we're asking the legislature to consider are relate to the contribution rate and the age 55. We would like to see Group G be made comparable to what the law enforcement community has, which is called Group C. That would be a lower contribution rate, and that would allow people to retire after 20 years at age 50. Which, is an incentive in and of itself. First of all, to stay 20 years, because you could retire with a full retirement at 50, but to also come work for the department, because there is really some hope that if we were able to be competitive on wages, if we had a retirement, we knew you could retire with a full retirement at age 50, like a state trooper can or a law enforcement officer can, you may have the ability to that's an incentive that I think most people would find very promising. We also hope that this committee, as you have in the past, will continue to invest in the facilities. Air conditioning in the facilities are really important. The commissioner talked about it. I think, Madam Chair, you asked about it. I think it's a $19 or $20 million investment. We have 2 facilities that are air conditioned. Southern State has experienced the worst of the heat. We had, I think, 4 or 5 COs who were brought to the hospital last summer suffering from heat stroke. We filed an OSHA complaint about it because it's really an untenable situation. So air conditioning is about improving the environment for everybody, including the folks who are living there. But it's also just a way of acknowledging that we want to treat the folks who work in corrections with respect and make sure they have dignity. If you can't breathe while you're in 110 degree weather outside and it's 80 or 90 degrees inside and you're in the full uniform, it's very difficult to even think about coming back if you're going to spend 16 hours in this kind of environments. We've suggested to the commissioner, and perhaps you'd have some influence on this, that in these crisis situations, that managers who were trained at taxpayer expense and have experience working both in the field and in facilities be assigned to the field in facilities when we have emergencies like we did this weekend. To relieve people of the 16-hour shifts. We have managers who come from facilities, who come from the field. I know what they do in central office is important, but if they could come to the fire while it's burning, our members would appreciate that. But it also would have a very important impact of allowing the frontline workers to build a better understanding of what central office does, and central office build a better understanding of what the impact of their policy decisions are in real time on the ground. There's somewhat of a disconnect there between the managers in central office and our members on the front lines. That I think would help bridge it, and it would also, on a practical level, give people a chance to catch their breath. So really, I think that just gives you a quick summary of the crisis we're in. I think our people are exhausted. Our members are exhausted. They're desperate. They're in some cases hopeless, because this has been going on and on and on. We do have a glimmer of hope in this next a few weeks, if on February 13th, the administration is willing to work with us on finding a solution. I think we can work our way out of it. Potentially, we have before. But I just think generally in this department and in some of the departments where we have the highest turnover and vacancy rates, state government is going to have to come to terms with the fact that it's going to cost a lot more money to safely staff these facilities. True with nurses, family service workers, correctional officers, snowplow drivers, law enforcement officers. These are the positions where we have a really deputy state's attorneys, victim advocates, admin. We have real challenges here, and it's just going to cost more money to compete with the private sector that is responding to this, to attract and retain staff. So that, Madam Chair, is my overview of the current crisis that we are facing, and we ask for any help you are able to give.
Okay, well, thank you. So are there questions? Yes.
So the crisis is pretty much centered in the facilities and not at the probation and parole offices.
Well, it spills over to probation and parole in two ways. One is that they are the backup team that has to be called in to come to a facility when they're understaffed, and a lot of our probation and parole officers are making that doing that additional work. But where it really spills over into the field is in terms of hospital coverage. So it's particularly true in Southern State has a lot of this because the elderly population is at Southern State, and they typically require a lot more medical attention. And as you heard the commissioner say accurately, the condition of the folks coming into the correctional system is bad, and they end up in the hospital a lot. So it used to be that you sent 2 correctional officers to the hospital to sit with the inmate while they're there. Because there are no correctional officers, they've been sending the field staff, particularly in the Brattleboro office, in Bennington, and in Springfield, because of the population at Southern State. It's happening all over the state. So they do their regular job. They have to do the regular job, go to court, do the pre-sentence investigations, go monitor people in their homes. They do that all day. And then they're either on standby at home to be called into the hospital, or they're at the hospital. And that has been going on for years now. And our field staff, I think the commissioner did testify that there's something called the COS team, which he mentioned in his testimony that is, I think 9, maybe it's now 11 positions that are dedicated to hospital coverage. That really needs to be more like 20 positions because of the number of people we have in the hospitals, 24/7 coverage. We don't have enough to eliminate that demand or eliminate that need on the probation and parole officers who aren't able, they're doing the best they can, but when you've been up all night at the hospital and then you're supposed to be in court and do your job, just there is a limit to what a human being can do. So we have to end that hospital coverage for probation and parole. It's just the community supervision, the numbers of folks in the community, very large number. I think the commissioner said like 5,000. Requires them to really, in order to be effective, to fully engage in that supervision. So it does spill into the field through that.
And when you were talking about the management going through a crisis, can you talk a little bit about that? I assume you're not talking about the superintendents in the facilities, or is that who you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about the managers who work in central office, many of whom came from facilities and who came from the field, who could go sit with folks in the hospitals, who could go into a correctional facility, maybe one that they even worked in, and help alleviate some of this. It's not that we don't appreciate the work that they do. We understand they have important roles to play, but this is the most immediate thing that needs to be resolved. We need to give people a break. It's a small thing. It's symbolic.
Do you know how many folks work in central office?
Roughly.
So the 100?
I don't have the top of my head. DHR could tell you, corrections could tell you. And I did know at some point, I think I don't have it. I don't want to speculate, but I did at some point know how many people were in central office having come from the field or from the facility, because I asked that question a million times, and I don't know it off the top of my head, but it was significant enough so that the Brattleboro Probation and Parole Office would get a break from hospital coverage. They're the ones who are they're the smallest offices with the greatest demand. And in a situation like this in Southern State where the problem is obvious, the problem is bad everywhere. It's really bad in Southern State. It's a way of saying, hey, management gets it. We're all in this together. And we're all going to see the effects of what our policies are. And we're also going to build relationships with people who are carrying out those policies. It would help bridge the gap a lot. I've been unsuccessful in convincing this commissioner, previous commissioners to do this. I've asked repeatedly over the 12 years I've worked at the SEA for them to consider this. And really, we didn't have a staffing problem until about 5 years ago. When I started, we had the opposite problem. We had too many people. We had people lining up to work for corrections. And that was the problem because they were using temporary staff. We had people just wanting to work there. And then about 5 years ago, I don't know what triggered it. It started to turn the other way. It may have been demographics. I don't know what it was, but it really, we've been raising this issue for about 5 or 6 years, and it's now becoming so obvious that I think it's on the top of everybody's. To me, the previous commissioner, Commissioner Baker, it took me the better part of his tenure to get him to admit there was a crisis. Finally, he said it. I almost fell out of my chair. And I think this current commissioner has admitted there is a crisis. So that's good.
Okay, are you finished with those questions?
I have one.
No, go ahead, because I have a question for both of you.
So, the relevant metrics that you're talking about here is all of this information just available from DOC? And then you just ask them, and get it, or is this something where you are suggesting these should be in reports that another report that DOC does annually or quarterly for some of these? These should be in statute.
Well, these should all be questions they can answer. This is information that they have and certainly JFO could get for you.
Okay.
But the reason we thought these through, there was actually some members of the Joint Justice Oversight Committee that suggested we do this, is that if you got the data, they answered these questions, it would give you a better sense of what we're talking about. And like, for instance, some of the inmate services, how many times have they been locked in their cells? How many times has educational services been canceled? When has the rec? How many times have the rec opportunities been canceled? The number of incidents resulting from missed bathroom breaks. So we've gone through and thought about, okay, what data does the legislature need that would give them a more complete picture of what's really happening? This was our attempt at doing that. It's data that's available. Although I don't know, the only thing one caveat, I'm not sure about the inmate services, whether they track that. They probably should.
They should.
Yeah. If they don't, that's one thing you could ask them to start doing.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So since you have a staffing problem, does that mean that you have an overcrowding problem?
Well, I think the commissioner did testify that there's more, there are more offenders than we have capacity for.
Okay.
With 100 and change, 115 folks who are in Mississippi. I would say that the demand on the system, it's hard to answer that question. The one thing I would say is if you thought about the commissioner's testimony about the nature of the offenses that result in someone being incarcerated, the low-hanging fruit is gone. The folks who are there have committed mostly violent offenses, or they're accused of violent offenses, and they're at risk of flight. This is not an easy population to manage because of the acuity of the situation. And I think our members would agree with the commissioner that the mental health system has resulted in people moving from one institution to another institution. Our members don't feel good about trying to manage the mental health scenario in a correctional facility that they don't feel qualified to manage. One thing that's really interesting, what's really important, is our members were hired with a job description that has a very specific outline of their responsibilities to keep the facility secure. And they are not social workers. Some of our case managers do more social work, more management, but they're not social workers. They do their best. They do receive some additional training, but it's hard to balance that role of being a social worker that helps someone pull themselves out of where they are and somebody who's also supposed to keep that facility safe. So I don't know how to say, I don't want to say that there's an overpopulation or I would say that the challenge really relates to the acuity and the deep sense of this deeply ingrained problems that people come to the facility with: bad health, bad mental health, having committed some very serious crimes, for which they may be incarcerated for a long time.
That helps. Senator Plunkett, do you think some sentencing is not happening because of the difficulties in the correction facilities?
I can only talk from my experience.
I mean, and I'm saying this is a strictly
Yeah.
opinion, and I
Yeah, obviously
understand.
not from, my other job position, but, I couldn't say is really my answer. It doesn't seem like it, but that's just my little brief, overview of things.
Okay.
I don't, there might be someone at, the executive director might be able to talk about that. They have some 10 years do want. You might have some sense on that.
And what we heard last year and year before, just generally that judges don't make decisions based on how full a facility is.
Mhm.
They compartmentalize.
I will say Judge Zone was the chief superior judge, just answered that question in the House.
Mhm.
I happened to be there, and he said,
Oh, what did he say?
the chair just said,
Okay,
it's never factored into his decision making or into he didn't think into his colleagues' decision making. There are some discussions. He also talked about services that are available,
Mhm.
that they're not available out in the world. The chair of Institutions Committee, Corrections Institutions, raised the issue of services being provided by corrections that aren't available out in the community, whether that encourages someone to be sentenced. And he didn't believe that was true. I don't want to speak for him.
yeah,
But talk to him.
that's interesting to know
Directly.
though.
Yeah, you might want to ask him directly.
Yeah. Okay, so I have just a couple questions. So, the honors unit is, which we talked about a little, actually, we didn't really talk about there's a couple of honors units that I'm aware of. There was one at Southern State and there was one at the, women's facility. And I hope that they still exist and I hope that we're looking at them in other.
Marble Valley, I think, is next.
Okay, and my understanding of how that occurred was the staffing shortage actually, kind of, led to that as a stopgap, but you as a group found that was a very helpful, thing for both the inmates and the staff. Because what happens in those situations, and please, let them know how you see it, but from what I've learned, the individuals who are there take responsibility for their behavior, basically, and they aren't in their cells as much, and they are sitting, talking, working calmly. It takes less staff to come in and take care of them. The schedule was actually altered. And it was somewhat restorative justice. There's some of that involved. There's not a lot of structure to it. It might need some more structure. But I'd really like to know more about that system or ability, because the way it looked to me, it was better for everyone. It was there was less tension. And so,
Yeah, I haven't heard a lot about that from our members, other
Okay.
than the fact that, because of the staff in crisis, the first position in the security side that gets collapsed or goes vacant is the positions that are called flows. And those are the people who, relieve people for bathroom breaks and for the regular breaks, and who check the honor wing, unit to see what's going on there. And I've seen recently a depiction from one of our members of what they had. I think they were supposed to have 4 floats. This was at Southern State, and they had 1. And then they listed everything that float was supposed to do, which included checking on the honor unit. It looked virtually impossible for one person to carry out all those responsibilities. And the float was also, the person's going to come to you if you need extra help. So what I'm concerned about, I think what our members are concerned about, is that if we don't have enough staff, that we are not going to be, that may not be successful unless we fully staff the full facility.
right, well, and it may not be happening if
Yeah.
they're not letting people have that
Right.
agency.
I don't know anything about that, but I do know that was the most recent conversation I had with somebody about,
Okay,
what I mean.
all right, and that's something I'd like to talk about more another time.
Thank you. Also, has the state done anything good at all? Just kind of curious. I mean, we've got a good pay rate, we brought air conditioning in, we brought inmates home from Mississippi, where we can do them for 25,000 versus 90. But have they done anything good?
Well, first of all, I'll just correct one thing about the air conditioning. The air conditioning is more theoretical at the moment.
Well, but it's working on it. Well, we spent,
Well-
we're spending millions of dollars on
Yeah.
it, but it's going.
But it's not there yet.
Yeah,
So-
and actually,
Yeah, oh, yeah, we've already done a couple facilities already, so we're doing more. But, and we're gonna do more. We've got it in the capital bill and all that. I'm just curious if there's anything good that they've done.
Well, I'll say this, I do think, in conjunction, they didn't do it alone, working with the VSEA, this last contract did invest about $11 million more. That it didn't hit necessarily the same way across the whole system in terms of addressing the needs of the security staff. It did help many people across the whole system, which was good. I think when they entered into the side letters of agreement, first being under Commissioner Baker and a couple under Commissioner Demmel, those were very positive. And they had a great deal of positive impact. So we're hopeful that will be something in the next few weeks that we can do again. And our hope is that it will be sustained either permanently or long enough that it will allow us to stabilize the crisis we're in, so that we can make the reforms we want to make to the system.
I really think the best thing we could do is send 100 people down to Mississippi, and then we could save $75,000, and then maybe we could work on some of the things that you'd like to work on. But as of right now, because they basically did kind of admit that it was, even though you danced around it just a little bit, to be fair, that there was an overstaffing, that there was too many inmates and all of that. But I just know the state's done a little bit of good for you, and they've worked hard with you a little bit, and if we get acknowledgement that there's a little bit of good that's going on there with, I think that there has been, but just a little acknowledgement of that would go a long ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think that our hope is to be able to work with them collaboratively on the issue of competitive compensation for safe staffing. And that, I think, is if that is something we can achieve, I think that would be helpful. And when they have done that in the past, that's been a good thing. I do think they certainly don't control the acuity of the population. That it's not somebody somewhere made the decision to deinstitutionalize our mental health facilities, and that was made prior to anybody being in power. Maybe Vince was there when it happened, but the people who are in power now certainly aren't responsible for that. But we are where we are, And we have to find a way to solve this. We think we have some solutions. We hope that we have a equal partner in the administration to make them come to life.
Okay. Is that good, Senator Ingles?
I'm good.
Okay, so, this might be something for another meeting, but, what I understand of what's happening with the reentry, not the women's reentry, the official reentry, but just, when folks go back into the community, there seem to be fewer homes and buildings and units that corrections used to have and probation and parole used to manage. And it's concerning because obviously we want people to be able to be functional and supported when they get into communities so they don't come back, right? And that system seems to be messing up and not, it's not what it was.
I'm sorry, Senator, and just so I understand what you're talking about.
Yeah,
You're talking
so-
about halfway houses?
Or reentry or yeah, well, we don't call them halfway houses, but
I don't know
that
if
is
that's it.
what they are. It's like interim
Yeah.
housing.
Yeah.
And I know that in my area, a lot of that, a significant amount of that is gone. Because it wasn't being supported by parole folks, or parole and probation, whichever is the appropriate one. So can you speak to that? Was that a staffing issue or?
Well, I think I won't speak specifically to that, but I will
Okay.
say that if you think back to just last week when the commissioner was here to testify, a lot of the reentry work is done by our caseworkers. They are being pulled into the facility to staff security positions on a regular basis. They're also now managing the court system in the correctional facility, which is a new responsibility that they didn't have before. So I think what the commissioner said, and I think we wouldn't disagree with him on that, is that it has limited a lot of their ability to do the reentry work that we would hope that they would do. And then you have the hospital coverage and the facility coverage in the field that is limiting their capacity in the field to offer the kind of support to folks they're supervising that they would like to. That maybe would sustain them longer out in the field. So it all comes back. That's why I think from VSA's perspective, you can't do anything else in the correction system until you address this issue. And actually, it does remind me of one other thing. It's a good example, I think. The commissioner talked about it, and I think we've heard about the MAT program now called MOD, I think is the new term for it, that helps. Initially, the SEA was, with the management, very concerned about the ability of the system to manage a program of this size. We still maintain that one of the weaknesses of the MAT program or MOD is that this was a program that was added to the list of things corrections needed to do without any additional resources. No additional staff was hired. No additional positions were authorized to manage the Medline. That is extensive, which is extensive and important to prevent drugs from being brought into the correctional system. I think you heard some testimony, Senator, you may have raised it, of folks who are receiving the medication and finding ways to get it to not take it, but to sell or to trade it. And that is a concern that if you don't have enough staff available, that's going to happen more often than not. That's at least what our members have said. There's also the issue of not enough nurses anywhere, but particularly in the correctional facilities themselves.
Right.
You need nurses to administer the meds. So
Right, and then there's the shot, which could be
yeah,
a nice alternative. It costs more, but it's more effective. That's my understanding.
yeah. So those,
Yeah, so many opportunities for improvement, huh?
Yeah, I think the reason I raise that is if you have an idea of an additional thing that could be done, that might be a good thing. The PT program, maybe it's a good thing. Think about adding staff to it before you require that it be implemented. Because that really is, I think, from our members' perspective, a significant burden. The commissioner said the same thing. I think we agree with him. The workload is also an issue that causes people to leave. They're saying, this is too difficult. This is too tough. And so we don't want to make it worse, is what I'm saying is while we're in this crisis, if we could just take a break on adding more things to the demands on correction staff, I think our members would appreciate that.
All right. Any other questions? All right, well, this has been helpful.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so do we have any other questions or suggestions? We have another couple minutes if we want to talk about tomorrow. We're doing IT, capital budget. We'll get back to corrections on either Thursday or Friday. There's a lot of pieces, obviously. My recollection with air conditioners was that because that was the first year that I was here, and we were appalled by the conditions, and we were very explicit that we wanted those air conditioning units to be used immediately, even if they weren't, it wasn't a permanent installation.
Yeah.
Well, they did as far as what, they got two facilities now, but the first year was that they were gonna at least have some areas to where they could get air conditioning to, because it is a building that you just don't go drilling a hole in the wall. And so they were gonna have these areas to where they could go into and to cool themselves down, and they did that immediately, and then they are working on the rest of it.
Yeah.
Is it
The problem
It'd
is,
be the
I've been to
inmates.
meetings before with Steve, and he gets these people so wound up and so much on high.
Can I stop you for a second? Can we adjourn and go offline?
Well, actually, when we are all talking about a topic, we
Okay.
need to be online, so we just.
Okay.
Just to have a little, and I'll just keep it brief, just to have a little acknowledgement about what everybody's trying to do to work together. You can't, you can't just be all negative all the time. You've got to acknowledge something. And there's no acknowledgement of anything. There's no acknowledgement of good faith negotiation. There's no acknowledgement of, bringing the prisoners home, the incarcerated people home, so that, that the people within the organization can have a job and have, things to do. But yeah, is there room for improvement? There is. But you just can't always just pound. Get in a room, talk nice together, and better things work out. And I get it. I really, really do. Nobody wants to work at a prison. There's a labor shortage everywhere you go. There really, really is. And I don't know how anybody, and we have very dedicated people. I have so many friends that not only worked in the prison, but were not going to do much in life because they were working for themselves. They were carpenters, they were whatever, and they were pounding their bodies up, and they had no health insurance. They didn't make enough money, but they got into these prisons when they first put the one in Newport in there. And now I have friends that are retiring from there that never would have retired ever in their whole lives. And they're happy that they had that opportunity.
Yeah.
So it's not all bad. I have great friends now that are retired. They're happy. I have great friends that are working there, and they're glad to have a job. They're glad to have the benefits. They're glad to have the overtime because they really like the overtime, because that really allows them to make a lot more money.
Mhm.
So it's not, again, that's his take on it, which I get that. But when you talk to the rank and file, sometimes it's not that there's room for improvement. I get that. But it's nice to just have a good conversation, acknowledge some good.
And that's why it's important that we go into the prison too, and we have visits ourselves. I know folks who volunteer in the prison.
But I also know 50 people that work in the prison system now that are okay.
We didn't ask how many actually union members you represent around.
And those guys know that I have
We
their
can get
back.
those numbers.
Those guys
too.
know that I have their backs. They know that I have their backs. And they call me all the time and then whatever. So it just would be nice just to have a little bit better dialogue as far as to acknowledgement. I mean,
Yeah, you know better, but we did ask them to come talk about the staffing crisis.
And that's,
but
that's,
at the end of the
Yeah,
day,
no.
at the end of the day, he couldn't even say anything good. Right? So my take.
okay. And that's why we talked to multiple people about the situations. Okay,
You had mentioned it, and that is, I'm flying blind a little bit here, and I think it'd be good if we go visit.
yes,
I'd like to visit, and I want to do it, collectively. I don't know what our rules are as far as open meeting, if we can't do it because we have a quorum, do it all together, but,
yeah, if we have enough folks who want to go to the same place at the same time, we can just say that we're doing that and then.
And when you go, you're gonna meet some of the nicest dedicated people ever. You really, really are. And you're gonna see a facility that runs, facilities that run pretty darn good. And,
I'd absolutely like to go to Springfield sooner rather than later.
Good,
Just so
me too.
I can just know what I'm talking about.
Totally. Springfield, Women's Prison, I'm
Yeah.
up to Newport.
Um,
So we'll schedule those.
that'd be great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you for your interest. All right, so I think with that, we are ready to end.